So Katie, the other day, sent me and Bruce a video of a church choir singing a song that was commissioned by Elizabeth Alexander and Tony Larson. Elizabeth lives just down the road from me and she attends Unity Church Unitarian, but she's a renowned composer who does work nationally. The song is titled, "Love is the Spirit of This Church," and hopefully we'll be able to bring it to our choir in this congregation at some point. The version Katie sent me was one of those ones that looks familiar these days with those little boxes with individuals in each box singing on their own. The words run along the bottom of the screen. This is often the reality of choir pieces assembled in the age of COVID. Technology that choir directors and technical people are able to make this composite of many voices into one song. COVID weary, I looked for another version. Those were so charming initially, and now I'm just tired of them. The one I found was a full stage of choir members performing at the Pacific Northwest UU Music Festival. Imagine that. What if we had like a Midwest UU Music Festival? That's for another day, I guess. At the opening of the video, there's this woman who's introducing the piece, and she starts by saying, "Good morning. In a community such as ours, it's easy to focus on daily details. No matter how hard we try, we can sometimes forget what this blessed gathering is all about." She continues, "But I'm here today to remind you that it's really about one thing, something intangible. You can't hold it in your hand, you can't hang it on the wall or deposit it in the bank. It's not a building, it's not an altar or books or arts or music or a sound system. You know what I'm talking about, what church is all about. Love," the crowd screams. "That's right, it's about love. Say it with me. Love," she says. "That's why we're all here." By this time, the band is accompanying the choir, that's going to accompany the choir, is already playing in the background, and Elizabeth Alexander is on stage with her back turned to the camera. She's facing the choir and she's started swinging, and her body is prepared to begin. The choir, you can sense it, is coming alive. They are stirring in anticipation of their first note. And then they sing. The words, "Love is the," is it love is the spirit of the church? Now I think I might have written that because that's what I'm so used to. Yeah, love is the spirit of this church. The words go, "Love is the spirit of this church. Our church is built neither on brick nor stone, for it's love that is the spirit of this church. It's a shelter fashioned from our hearts alone. Yes, it's love in the spirit of this church." Then it goes into this little, "For it's love, yes, it's love, for love is the spirit of this church." And it says, "Not the walls or the steeples, but a gathered people is what makes up the spirit of this church. It's not the stained glass that makes these windows bright, for it's love that's the spirit of this church. They're illuminated by compassion's light. Yes, it's love that's the spirit of this church." You can imagine there's kind of a catchy little refrain in there. It certainly speaks to us today as we prepare to say goodbye to our beloved building on Oakley Drive. As a sidebar, I'm going to push one more time to get you into that building. A couple people have come in recently who haven't been there for a while, and they speak of sort of that visceral grief and love and memory that comes up when you're actually standing in rooms there. So I really do encourage you to come on your own, come with others, come during those time slots so that you can have that experience and say goodbye in a way that won't be just the larger gathering. And then I do hope you come to the larger gathering on the 26th, and we'll do it online and in person. We know the building isn't the church. We've been talking about that since COVID started, right? And yet the Oakley Drive building is where community has gathered for over half a century. Memories live in those walls, and they are connected to that church home in our hearts. There's no denying it. That's the truth, and I hope that we can honor it. I know I've been feeling it strongly, and I'm like a relative newcomer compared to most y'all. And yet we haven't been in the building since March 2020. It will have been 2 years. when we gather to say goodbye. 2 years. I mean, it's like literally unimaginable. It still kind of leaves me in shock when I think about it. We have been, and we will be a scattered community. One that will come to this building, Fridley Middle School, for a time being. We'll gather on Sunday morning for services, and the choir will sing in the band room on Wednesday night, and the band will practice super early on Sunday mornings. And beyond those times, we're going to be a scattered community. There's no way to talk about today's subject of loving one's neighbor without stopping to really think about the impact of these 2 years. We don't enter into this phase of our lives together as MSUS or a larger society without paying attention to the weariness and the disorientation and the loneliness and the isolation of the past 2 years. We need to stay aware of and sensitive to the impact of these years and recognize that we're going to need more time and more energy to move forward than we may have several years ago when we've all been together, when life felt normal. I like to think that we're just a little weary and rusty, but we still work. So imagine that image of a dandelion, you know, the kind when the wind catches it and then you see those little seeds blow off into the horizon. It's an image we've seen many times. I'll mention why I'm talking about that image in 1 second. But first of all, I just want to think about this time with Mr. Rogers when he was broadcasted. The time when there were far fewer TV stations and so much less technologies, porches and neighborhoods where people gathered together and they welcomed one another. There have been sociological studies on the loss of neighborhoods and the central role of porches in early American lives. So what does it mean that each of us sits at our computers in a home, and those computers in our hands that are our cell phones? We are in such a time of uncertainty and change. And yet, when I share with my peers that we sold our church and we don't yet know what our permanent home will be, my peers who are Christian, they just simply smile. The early Christian church had no home either. A Methodist minister down the road from MSUS, he laughed as he reflected on the image of the church in people's homes with no central building. Sarcastically, he declared, "What a radical idea." It's a sarcastic dude. The article I had Googled with that image of the dandelion is titled, "What the Scattered Church Can Do in the Time of Uncertainty." It's posted by a Christian youth organization called Lifeway Young Adults, a Baptist group. The introduction says, with the news of churches having to close our doors on Sunday and suspend all large group gatherings for the unseen future, it's vital to leverage these circumstances for the kingdom. That's their language. This is an opportunity for advancement of the kingdom and in us personally, among us corporately, and in our communities where we live. They say the early church was scattered for different reasons than us today, but we can learn from them as to what to focus on in these moments. And then they say, here are some practical things to do as a scattered church. And they mention prayer and sharing the gospel, showing hospitality, leading worship with your family, the importance of rest, the reality of longing and of hope. Another article about scattered churches. It's amazing. If you Google scattered churches, you'll find many articles. It starts with an image of all these different colored fall leaves lying on the ground. I love all these images. The article is once again on different strategies for small churches which are scattered. This author suggests making Sundays more than just worship by adding on a potluck, which we could potentially do, though we don't get to use the kitchen, adding a potluck or a volunteer opportunities or something else to the Sunday morning worship. He speaks about rallying in local areas, equipping people to do ministry in their neighborhoods, having people follow their own leads and leveraging their own relationships. The article recommends clarifying parishes, which they describe as mapping out where your congregations live and kind of doing a north, south, east, and west division, and then trying to build communities in those pockets. And finally, he spoke about Decentralized ministry, having people gather on their own for different parts of ministry. So it could be the band or the choir or book groups or the covenant group or more that hopefully will form in the future, the people who live alone, the moms group, the 60-plus-year-olds. And finally, he suggests a church that raises up leaders that will go out like those little seeds that float out into new places, that will plant themselves and then grow into something new. So here's our time of learning. It's a time to learn what it means to be a church and community. As much as I really love that Oakley Street building, it is at the end of a dead-end street. It's hidden, it's off the main road. You have to see that little Unitarian church sign if you know you're gonna turn there. We don't have that big A-frame thing. People don't stumble upon the Oakley Street building, they find it deliberately. So now we're going to have to do church in the community, whether it means volunteer projects or gathering in coffee shops or in people's homes or going to events and rallies that feed our souls or stir our sense of justice and our spiritual senses. Now it's time to explore. We can explore what sharing a building could look like, or even explore what never owning a building might look like. As I always said in career development, to explore is not to commit, it's just to explore. So it's this time where we can kind of let our imaginations go wild and lean into love and what love is calling us next. So 2 stories before I close. Last week, Amy led a program online, and it was a video of Bill Doherty. He's a member of Unity Church Unitarian, and he started an organization called Better Angels. So we watched a video of him talking to folks at Hennepin County about what their program does. And he's very strong about getting people to not demonize the other, whether that's somebody of a different party, whether it's someone who has different beliefs around social justice or around faith. He wholeheartedly challenges us to find ways that we are similar to one another, to find ways that we're alike. Because he believes we can like and even love another despite our differences. He believes that's a core need in our society now and in the past and in the future. So as Diana mentioned, the core principles of our faith, that first one is that inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the last one talks about our interconnectedness. Those are definitely the pillars. Those are what we're called to do, and I'll tell you, they are a heck of a thing to try to follow. How do we connect to love, which is a core value of our faith? How do we connect to these 2 primary principles in a time when it is so divided and divisive? I know that I left that program the other night just struggling with the question for myself and for the rest of us. And sure enough, the next morning I was driving down the highway and I saw a car with a bunch of bumper stickers next to mine, and the one that stood out was God is pro-life. You could feel the anger coming up in me. It started in my stomach and then it ran up to the tip of my head. And if you could have seen my thoughts or feelings as images, there would have been steam coming out of my ears and like lightning bolts out of my eyes, which would be spinning. So I looked at the man as I drove by and I took a few breaths and I tried to imagine what it must feel like, what must bring him to believe so strongly in the life of an embryo without consideration of the life of the woman's body where the embryo rests. Is it a credible perspective? It may not be mine. I believe personally it is embedded in larger beliefs of patriarchy and dogmatic order and doctrinal commands, and yet there's a part of him and they and them and the other that can still be lovable and believe that, no matter how abhorrent parts of their beliefs may feel to me. In the second story, many of you may know that I'm a rather avid walker. I head out every morning. I walk an hour, whether it's with friends or colleagues or just with my puppy, Reggie. So one day, several months ago, I was out walking and Elizabeth Alexander was out on the sidewalk. I used to see her every Sunday because we raised our kids in the same church. On that day, I hadn't seen her in a long time. It had been COVID, after all. We're all like locked in our houses. I still smile when I think of her heading my way. She was just so excited to connect. Clearly, she had been at home way too long and isolated in the world of COVID, and she expressed that sentiment immediately. She asked if she could walk with me. Honestly, I love my time alone, so reluctantly I agreed, being a good neighbor, and she did for the rest of the hour. Even though it was way out of her way and she ended up several blocks from her home, she needed to hear about another life other than her own. She needed to be in relationship. We connected about our work and our children and the current state of our spirits. This reminds me of the criminal justice pioneer and advocate Brian Stevenson, who calls out that we need to be proximate to one another. He speaks of how we need to be in the vicinity of people to form trust and relationships. The people most proximate in our lives are those we run into or that we put ourselves in contact with. So given this time, this would happen to include people who live in our neighborhood or folks who we engage with online. I think about needing to push ourselves to be proximate in this time of COVID when it's too easy to keep the doors closed. I confess last night the neighbor's garage light was flashing on and off. I didn't get off my couch and go knock on her door. I didn't have her phone number, but I was like, nope, it's not very neighborly. Confession on the neighborhood sermon day. So I think about this scattering. How will we be proximate? How will we feed the relationships that we have? How will we nurture new ones? How will we push ourselves to the margins of being comfortable in a time where it's even hard to find where to begin, where to go, what to do? So here we are, 2 weeks until we say goodbye to our building and truly become a scattered church. So I'm wondering how we hold this. What do we say to each other? How do we encourage each other? How do we inspire each other? And how do we imagine what this scattered church might look like? And what are the opportunities included in this moment? So I'm curious about how you may bring the church or your Unitarian Universalism out into your neighborhood. Do you have a story about when you tapped into something you learned here or with each other or from Unitarian Universalism that shifted what you did at a moment or what you're doing in your lives? And I also wonder about how you might imagine us being good neighbors as we leave our Oakley Drive building and move into a future that begins with this rental space and other places where we will find to be together. Not so much technical fixes, but how can you imagine us being those seeds that blow out and land in other places? They're not small questions, so you can sit with them or you can answer them. I'd love answers, but I also get, it's Sunday morning and y'all have had long weeks. So anybody have any thoughts about that you'd like to share, either online or here? I see you two chatting back there. Are you thinking something? Okay, Chad. See, it's bad when you chat. It's like, oh, look at that. Okay. Just one sec, he's getting your mic up.
Okay.
Yep.
We attended Amy's workshop in how to talk with others that may have a different opinion of that you share. And one of the things talked about, validating the other person's point of view by saying, yes, I see, why you would think that way. And so we were watching Deep Space Nine, and Merle said, Worf is discussing with the other Klingon why he supports the Federation over the Klingon Empire, and he's using better angel skills.
Oh my goodness. That is awesome.
It is the best Star Trek.
Yeah, we will find a way to get some of the better angel skills out to the congregation because he has some rather concrete ways to help us. Braver angels, thank you, not brave, braver. Thank you, Jamie. Got it. Thanks, you guys. So you've seen it happening on your TV. Anybody else here or online?
Not seeing anybody online.
Well, thank you for thinking about it. I look forward to bringing some opportunities to all of us so we can explore together. And I encourage you that if you have thoughts on ways we might introduce each other to new ways of being in this scattered community, to let me or the board know. Several years ago, we went and visited the Recovery Church in St. Paul, which was a warehouse that was converted into a church. I see Lois shaking her head. And I think what it did was it all of a sudden shifted us from, oh my God, you could literally not be in a church and have church. Like, it was awesome to see what they did with this warehouse in St. Paul. So I hope that we can give opportunities like that to each other in this period of time, where we can, open our minds to other ideas and imagine ourselves perhaps differently than we've been in a home that we've loved and cherished. May it be so.